Right, morning everybody. Welcome to Marketing for Breakfast. Some of you have been to one of the sessions before. Some of you are new. So I thought what I'm going to do is, because there's quite a few of us, I'm going to do this like celebrity squares. So rather than go around and everybody introduce themselves, just so everybody knows who's on the session, I'll say your name and your company and the sort of sector, and then in celebrity squares fashion, if you could wave like that, so people, apart from the fact your name is already on there, but I thought we'll kick off in that way. But just as a quick reprise on Marketing for Breakfast, RQ set this up for top flight marketeers, basically, and to have a discussion. It doesn't mean we have to travel anywhere. You have everybody get their breakfast okay yesterday?
No.
And I hope you're drinking from your Marketing for Breakfast mug. You've got it. One or two of us haven't. Basically, if you keep up to date with the website and the LinkedIn sessions about when the next sessions are coming, this is about the 6th or 7th session we've had. We've looked at things like loyalty. Very, very pleased Karen actually led a discussion on loyalty. We talk about that a bit more. We looked at media measurement and customer behavior, as you would expect from an outfit like RQ. But we also did a very interesting session on the role or not of social purpose in advertising, with one of the one of the very best creative directors of the last 20, 30 years, Steve Harrison. So there's a variety of stuff which affects us. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the session this morning, from the pitch to the boardroom, with our guest, Rob Andrew. For those of you either haven't followed rugby union in detail, or perhaps of a slightly younger vintage than, for example, myself, Rob is one of the all-time England rugby greats. So 70 caps, 2 as captain. I think for 10, 12 years span playing for England as fly half, who I think are often described as the director of operations on the field, or playmakers. Also played for Wasps and Newcastle, where he was also director of rugby. And this is all during the amateur and semi-professional, as it moved from amateur to semi-professional. And as also was chief executive until recently of Sussex, because as well as being an England rugby player, he also played first-class cricket, playing for Cambridge. We were just chatting about that, the fact that he batted left-handed but bowled right-handed. So making the most of what you're good at. And he's just starting as the managing director of the English Cricket Board, sorting out the English domestic game, men and women's cricket. So I'll introduce it in a moment, but just if we can do the celebrity squares bit. So in no particular order, we've got Sally Waterfield from Foresters Friendly. Morning, Sally. Simon Wigley from NEC. Morning, Simon. Graham Davis from Aegeus Insurance. Ollie Watkins, not the England number 9, but from Meta. Morning, Ollie. Alistair Pegg, who's a brand consultant but has had a long career with Aviva, Virgin Money Co-op. We've also got Alexander Bannister, long career with Nationwide, and now works as a board advisor and independent economist. So I won't put you on the spot about what's been announced today, Alexander, to try and explain it all. We've got Tom Goff from On the Market, estate agency. Dean Harvey from Jacobs Media Group, which is travel, which is one of my old industries. Richard McCulloch from William Hill Gambling. Morning, Richard. Louise Perslove from Unity. Bank and Finance, and Carla Punter from Body Shop. You there, Carla?
I don't think Carla's joined yet. I'll keep an eye on her.
Yeah.
She joins.
Okay. There we go. Right. So Rob's going to kick off as we normally do with our guest speaker. I'm absolutely delighted to have him here, and we'll talk for about 15, 20 minutes. If you've got a burning question or there's something which is what isn't clear, put your hand up, unmute. Don't forget to unmute yourself, and I'll effectively bring you into the discussion. But afterwards, what we want to do is make sure we've got plenty of time for follow-up questions and debate. We'll run through till about, it's scheduled till 10:30, but what tends to happen is people start to drop off towards the end. So I'll draw it to a conclusion at about 10:20, 10:25. And then if people want to stay on for a few minutes, that's fine. Is that all okay? Lovely. And in case you're wondering who I am, I've been in marketing for 40 years, client side, supply side in terms of consultant and planning. And I'm also a radio DJ. So don't forget, 6 o'clock every Sunday, shout at your smart speaker, play PCRFM, Peterborough City Radio. And you can hear my dulcet tones. Somebody told me the other day, you've got a good face for radio. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Rob Andrew. He's going to talk about from the pitch to the boardroom.
Morning. Thanks, Martin. Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us early in the morning. A couple of things that I'm going to try and flow through. And obviously, thanks to R-Cubed for inviting me along. I've got to know the guys there through a partnership and a relationship at Sussex Cricket, one of our partners. And as Martin said, I'm moving on after Christmas to another governing body, which I'll come back to during my little chat about governing body and governance and one or two other things. But look, thankfully there might be one or two on the call who are just about old enough to remember me. There's clearly one or two that aren't. So for those that don't know or do know a little bit about rugby, I was the one before Johnny Wilkinson, and now even Johnny is now getting out of date, because it's 20 years I think almost to the day that Johnny dropped his goal in 2003 to win that World Cup in Australia. Where's that 20 years gone? And I was the 15 years before that, so that is really scary. But there's a few things that two words I'm going to talk about mostly: teamwork and trust, and touch on culture and values and what I think that means or what it doesn't mean. There's been a lot of talk about culture and values in the last 15 years, probably 10 or 15 years, both in boardrooms and in companies, in changing rooms, and I've got some views on that. And then the other thing that just scares the living daylights out of me, and you guys will probably see it more than most, is just the pace of change of everything today on whatever business you're in, including sport, and I'll touch on that as well. So I started off in a rugby career, which was amateur, mid-80s. I played 10 years for England, 85 to 95. Never expected to get paid a single penny for playing. Didn't get paid a single penny for playing. Played in 3 World Cups. The first ever men's rugby World Cup in 1987, which was in Australia. Nobody was that interested in it, quite honestly. One of the best games of rugby that was ever played was a semi-final between Australia and France in the Concord Oval in Sydney, if anybody even knows where that is, out in West Sydney. There were about 13,000 people watched a men's rugby World Cup that had the likes of Nick Farr-Jones, Michael Lynagh, and Serge Blanco and Philippe Sella playing in the match. And it sort of unbelievable, really, where that was in those days, first ever World Cup. And you see where sport is now, where the men's game has gone in sport. Men's cricket final, the other day, 1 billion people watching in a stadium of 130,000 in Ahmedabad, when India, sadly for them, lost to the Aussies again, who happened to do quite well in World Cups. But what it taught me, and the 2 words, every company, every organization likes to talk about culture and values, and what words might they want their organization to be viewed as. And I'll come back to culture and values a little bit, but what I learned through a period of the late 80s, early 90s with Jeff Cook, who was the manager, and Will Carling, who was made captain at the age of 22, just out of university, was the development. I didn't know it was happening at the time, but there was a huge development of teamwork and trust. And if I had to pick 2 words that have defined what I've tried to do, or what I've tried to influence in my time in on the pitch and then off the pitch, going into management and touching on boardrooms as well, are those 2 words, and how those 2 words have created. And I think they've got more important, but more difficult in current environment to actually create. One of the things that back then, and it is a long time ago, is there was the issue of equal pay was quite straightforward back then, because it was amateur. So the dressing room, you looked around the dressing room and everybody got paid the same. We all got paid that much. I played 71 times for England, didn't none of us didn't make a single penny, because it was an amateur game. So we were doing it because we chose to do it, we wanted to do it. How do you take those values and those issues into the modern environment with modern people who want things now? They want things yesterday. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I've sort of battled with people and values and environments. And even back then, to create what we did create, which when I look back on it now, with some of the players that we had, some of you will recall, Will Carling, Jerry Guscott, Rory Underwood, Dean Richards, Brian Moore, Peter Winterbottom, Mickey Skinner, Mike Teague, household names, really. There was another England team in 2003 with Johnny Wilkinson, Martin Johnson. That cohort who won the World Cup also became household names. But there was a huge development of teamwork. And one of the challenges, I think, in modern day workplaces is how do we create that teamwork? We're probably, half of us probably sat at home now, and teamwork by definition happens because you need to spend time together as a team to understand each other, to get to know each other. How do you have honest conversations, really honest conversations, and honest feedback for people? I think that's becoming more and more difficult, partly because we're not together enough, and partly because people don't want to receive honest feedback. We had a pretty brutal dressing room back in the day, brutal in the sense of brutally honest, because we had people, in order to be successful, you have to have that honesty, and people have to take and give honest feedback, and we had that in abundance, as I know the 2003 team had, with Martin Johnson and Lawrence Dallaglio and Johnny Wilkinson, Will Greenwood. Those high performing teams really are driving for that single goal. And it's when you look back at the leadership of Jeff Cook in particular, who was the manager, and Will did an amazing job. It's only when you look back that you realize what was happening to you as an individual, because in the dressing room or in a workplace, you are probably, you're looking after your own career, you're looking after your own side of things and making sure that you're the best that you can be. But actually what's happening around you is subconsciously you're being formed into a high performing group, and that's what I felt, that's what we had happen to us, but at the same time, the other piece of this journey, and I'll come back to this a lot, is just the people themselves. And have you got the right, there's a lot of talk in sport, as there is in business, about have you got the right people on the bus, and what does that actually mean? And the more I look back at things that I've been involved in or things that happened to me, I realized what leaders were doing. They were slowly over time moving things around to get. So Clive Woodward did the same. Clive started in 1997. It took quite a while to shape that group of players to get to the point in 2003 when he got all of the right people in the right place on the right bus going in the right direction. And that is a real skill, to be able to hold that together and develop it. So the people bit is ultimately the most important thing. I'll come back to that as well, what I mean by that. So I had that England amateur experience. The rugby went professional in 1995. There was a lot of pressure to go professional, and I jumped out of my chartered surveying career, which I was in for 10 years whilst being an amateur rugby player. And I went to Newcastle because the rugby club had been bought by the football club. Sir John Hall owned Newcastle United. He bought the rugby club, and I went up there to be player coach, player manager for a little bit until my legs gave way, and then I decided to just be the coach manager. And that was a really interesting period because I was working for a self-made multimillionaire entrepreneur, and they tend to have a way of working, and they tend to know what they want, and they want it yesterday. And it was a sort of eye-opener for me in terms of working with somebody of that nature. But what we were able to do very, very quickly, and the whole premise of what we did, we were able to hand pick players because at that time nobody had a contract. So we got a head start, and we basically hand picked people, back to that people issue, who we knew and trusted could come and do a job, because I'd played with a lot of the players. I'd played against them, the likes of Inga Twigger-Marler, who played for New Zealand, two fantastic Scotsmen, Doddy Weir and Gary Armstrong, and Doddy sadly no longer with us after his MND battle. But we short-circuited the building of a team, which I think Jeff Cook and Clive Woodward had to build a team. We put a team together immediately based on what I felt were the culture and values that we needed to be successful, because I knew what the people were like. And the culture and values bit, which I know I touch on, I will come back to that in a minute, because I think sometimes people focus too much on culture and values, and actually what is really, really important is the behaviors that you want from the people that you've got. That's the key thing. And I was able at Newcastle with Sir John Hall to pull a group together really quickly, because I knew what the values and the behaviors I wanted from those people, and I knew that they had those values themselves because I'd played with and against them for so long. So I wasn't trying to shape behavior. I knew it was going to be there, and we did short circuit that, and we had a fantastic. We had an unbelievable time. Probably one of the best experiences I've had in my career. We put a group of together. We won promotion. We won the championship. It was short term because it was an older group of players, but we had a couple of really key people in there, and the roles of people on the bus are so important. And getting a disparate group together, particularly the rugby team, where you've got very different characters, you've got different skills required. We had a fantastic guy who became Johnny Wilkinson's guru, who was the glue that sort of held it all together. There's a guy called Steve Black, who sadly he's passed away as well now, but Steve was one of those unbelievable larger-than-life characters who he changed his job title on a monthly basis. He was happiness guru one minute. He then came in and said, this next few months I'm going to be director of enthusiasm, and he just kept everybody's spirits high the whole time, which is actually quite, how on earth he did it, I don't know. Because it was just tiring being around him. But you need people who are going to drive things and always be up to keep everybody motivated. And I think particularly at the moment when it's things are hard and we've come through COVID and we're still trying to work out where to work. Do we work from home? Do we work together? How do we create a culture and a vision? So I just think those things are really, really important. When I then left Newcastle and I went closer and closer into the boardroom environment, although I was slightly in a boardroom at Newcastle, but it was a boardroom that was pretty much multi-millionaire owner, and therefore the governance structures are not really the same with a multi-millionaire owner. They're sort of they tell everybody what they want to happen, and you decide whether you want to work for them or not. And within that structure, you try and create your own sort of culture. When I went to the RFU in 2006, I then entered the sort of governance world or constitutional world of a governing body, and there was a lot of talk about culture and values, and there was a lot of work done. And this is where I'll come back to the culture and values piece. That there's a lot of work done on culture and values. A lot of nice glossy brochures produced, a lot of descriptions of what people meant by teamwork and respect and enjoyment, a lot of words put up around the office building. But actually what happened, and this doesn't always happen clearly, but what happened was that there was not a good culture set from the top of the organization, which meant that the behaviors, and this is why I separate in my own mind, I'm more interested in behaviors and actions of people than what words are written up around the boardroom or around the office reception, because we can all put those words up. And the RFU had some words. Sussex Cricket, we've got values, we've got some words, and there's so many plays you can do on the words that you've got in your values. But actually, where it really counts is what are the behaviors of the people who are in that organization, and finding a way of of getting people to behave in the right way, I think is one of the biggest challenges in modern day business and sport. It's just, same in dressing rooms. You then throw in the money side of things, and the ambition side of things of young people, where they do appear to want everything today. That has created an incredibly challenging sporting environment. And you look at the amount of money that's involved in rugby now, football, and you look at the challenges that are coming with women's sport, challenges and opportunities. We were touching on it just before the call, where the pace of change of every business that people are involved in, and sport is no different. I mentioned earlier, I was playing the men's World Cup in front of 13. I didn't play in the semi-final, but I watched the semi-final, 13,000 people in Sydney. Okay, it's 35 years ago, and now we're dealing with the growth, exponential growth of team sports, and for people to manage that. I think when I look at football and I look at the amount of money and the way that Ferguson managed Manchester United, the way that Guardiola manages Man City, you look at all of these individuals who are being paid huge amounts of money, and yet they are able to create a culture that actually is a vision and holding everybody together, which I think is pretty remarkable in the current climate. So I suppose just to sort of finish a little bit on the sort of discussion around culture and values, and just the whole people debate is can you influence those people through your culture and values? Do the words on the wall actually mean anything to anybody? Or is getting the right people, and this is where recruitment and HR, the longer I've been involved in seeing how things work, your recruitment in the first place to get the right person in the right seat on the right bus. I've actually come to the conclusion that that's the most important thing than actually, because if those right people bring the right behaviors to the organization, what's written on the wall is irrelevant. And I've seen what's written on the wall go wrong so many times, that getting that people piece absolutely spot on from the beginning, I think, is the number one priority. And the final piece of that jigsaw is, we often think that we can influence and change people, and I think you can sometimes, but I think more often than not, it's really hard to change people's behavior. And there's a classic saying, which I've witnessed myself and seen it in action so many times. The saying that if you can't change the people, change the people, which is a sort of a tough way to sort of deal with things, because you do want to give people opportunities, and you do want to create teamwork and trust. But there comes a point where you have to make the right decision for the organization, for the dressing room, for the business. If that person can't be changed, or those behaviors, it's not so much the person, it's the behaviors of the person that need to change. And if they're not changing as a leader, you also lose respect from the organization, because on the ground, people know when people are not behaving properly and not pulling their weight. and therefore you, as a leader, you just you lose respect in the way that the organisation is being run. So I'll stop rambling there. It's been just ultimately some of the things that I've found the most challenging as I've gone through, and I've seen it go really badly wrong at various board and team levels, and then I've seen it go incredibly well, and trying to put your finger on what is it that has been the difference, I find really interesting, and still do, and still trying to work it out, to be honest.
Many thanks, Rob. And that last point, when we were preparing for this call, I mentioned to you the one decision I regretted is not tackling that change the people many years ago, and it nearly finished me off, because you start to lose the dressing room, so to speak.
Yeah,
because people can see that you're not dealing with something, and then you put it off and you put it off, and then it becomes expensive to rectify. I was interested, but talking of the dressing room, you started off talking about, that honesty and trust. And when we were preparing for this, you just talked about, an England dressing room, which was full of, huge, great guys who like tackling people and running around and getting in the way. People who direct operations, particularly, fly half, scrum half, and then forwards, all they want to do is get the ball and run with it. Backs who just want to get the ball and run with it. And about how some of those conversations went. I think Brian was one you mentioned.
Yeah, well, it goes to the makeup of a team, doesn't it? Because the makeup of a team is very, very different. You need lots of different characters, personalities. You don't need everybody to be a leader. You need everybody to be, as I say, the sort of on the right seat, in the right place to do their job, so that the whole works together really, really well. And with a rugby team, those that know a little bit about rugby, you couldn't have probably a more diverse group of people. The forwards, in particular, front row forwards, who all they want to do is go into a scrum and sort of fight with each other. And you've got backs like myself and Will Carling and Rory Underwood and Jerry Guscott. The last thing we wanted to do was have a fight with somebody. We just wanted to stay in clean kit and get out of the way of trouble and run around and try and get the ball to Rory to score some tries, whilst the forwards were sort of still walking around the pitch somewhere else. So that everybody is doing they're different things, and if you can pull that together, that's the skill of pulling a team together, and that's the skill of having a team that is the sum of its parts is greater than the whole, and that's where I think we've probably all seen operations where it goes well because you've got the right people in the right place, and we've all seen it where it just doesn't work and it falls apart because it's not coming together. And that's where I experienced, and being a fly half in rugby, there is a bit of directing operations and trying to get the forwards and the backs and everybody to work together. There's lots of debates with our England team about Dean Richards didn't want me to give the ball to the backs because it meant the forwards had to run around, and if the backs dropped it, they'd have to go and clear up the mess. He would rather I just kicked it down the field and they could just walk down the field, have a rest, and go to the next line out. And it's trying to get, and then they've got the captain outside me and Guscott and Underwood, two of the best outside backs England have ever produced, saying, give us the ball, we want to run around and score some tries. So it's trying to get that, they can have it at certain times, but sometimes the forwards might need a rest or a break, and we need to look after them. So you're trying to look after everybody, hold it all together. And at times it did blow up and that's fine as long as those honest conversations are given and taken in the right way, which is that we are collectively trying to make this thing better, and it doesn't become personal and it doesn't become individual. And that's a little bit where, I think selfishness comes in and is probably coming in more and more into the workplace and into dressing rooms, and therefore the management of that, I think, is where when I look at football and I look at the amount of money in a dressing room, how the ability of some of those managers to manage those individuals for the benefit of the whole, and put, there's a lot talked about team first, and it's a bit of a, it's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but it is absolutely critical to a dressing room and to a business where it is about team first, despite the individual nature of your role in the organization or your role in the team, or how much money you get paid versus somebody else. If you can, and I think that's more difficult now than it's ever been. But if you can create that team first culture with the behaviors that actually come with it, unselfish behaviors that actually really genuinely want to look after everybody in the organization, in the team, then you've got a chance. But it's very easy for that to break up, I think.
Good. Who'd like to? Craig.
Yeah. Hi, Rob. Can I ask, how in sport do you reward individuals? You talked about you need different people for different roles, doing different jobs than the right people. In business, we're very guilty of rewarding the visible high flyers, and you give them the money. And the people who are doing the duller, less glamorous work are less rewarded. So call centres, for example, are typically woefully unpaid because they're not doing anything exciting, whereas the people who are in charge of strategy or more visible thing will get the money, and that can lead to high turnovers. What's it like in sport? Is it only the people scoring the tries and the goals and the runs who get the recognition, or is it more equal than that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's sport. There's obviously there are market forces clearly in sport that are very visible, and transfers and wages, and yes, there is now a much more of a focus on the individual getting paid the most. And I think that's why the management of that has become so difficult. It's something that we've all looked at, and we all I've certainly tried around teams, and even in the office, I always try and work on the principle that, because everybody talks about what they get paid, even though they're not supposed to. So you almost try and look at it and be confident enough to. I used to do this when I was doing things at Newcastle. Used to be able to sort of look at it and think, am I brave enough to stick the wages up on the dressing room door, and actually, say, no, look, we're doing this collectively. We're trying to be fair about how we do things. And have the confidence. And you could look at this in an office environment as well and say, okay, well, we'll just put everybody's wages up in the people department, so anybody can go and have a look at them. Are we prepared to do that? Are we confident enough that if we did that, people would look at it and go, yeah, that's fair. I don't know how you do that, but it's something that I've always been very conscious of, because I think people do know, and they do talk, whatever we think, whatever we tell them. and therefore, well, if you can look in the mirror and go, well, I think we've been fair with this. I think people understand that as well, and I think that's the other thing that I've perhaps learned sometimes to my cost. When I've not made the right decisions, it's amazing how aware people are of what's going on, and they often know what you're going to tell them, whether it's moving them on or giving them more money or not giving them money. They're aware, they know, generally speaking, and I think if there's a fairness about it, then I think people understand.
Thank you.
Right, let's throw it open to the floor. Who else would like to ask Rob? Dean.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Rob. Cracking talk this morning. I'm going to push you a little bit harder, if I may, on this. If you can't change the people, then change the people. So, more often than not, the change that's required are those that are exhibiting kind of prima donna behaviour. Not team first behaviour. But if they are considered to be the star player, if you like, using this analogy, how far do you push it?
Well, that's always the killer question as well, isn't it? Because and my take on that has always been how much when do you reach the tipping point? Because there's normally a tipping point where people are prepared to put up with a certain amount of behaviour. But the management are prepared to put up with it, and even the team are prepared to put up with it if they're helping, if the results that they are the maverick, if you like, in the dress that we have, if that maverick is delivering, and therefore the organization and everybody else is benefiting. But once you reach the tipping point where the behaviors or the delivery start to slip, and that the tipping point is reached where now people are going, do you know what? I've had enough of this now. And I think there's always, whether it's a Ronaldo at Man United or a Kevin Peterson playing cricket for England, or there's somebody in the office and everybody knows who they are. There's a tipping point that does get reached, and then you sort of got to recognise when that tipping point is being reached. And the team are no longer prepared to put up with those behaviours. And if you recognise that, and look, I think it's a great question, and I've always looked at what Ferguson did at Man United for those 25, however many years, and you think, my goodness, what an antennae he had, and how brave he was. We always thought brave, but he clearly just recognised. Often before the tipping point was reached, because we often leave it too late, and the tipping point, we've gone beyond the tipping point, and damage is now being done to the rest of the organization, and damage is being done to the management because they haven't realized that we've gone beyond the tipping point, and the rest of the team are going, guys, when are you going to deal with this? Because it's now gone too far. Ferguson sort of did it. He appeared to me to be so clever that he did it before the tipping point was reached.
Yeah.
So you've got to judge when that tipping point is, because there nearly always is one.
Okay. Fingers crossed.
I don't know when it is.
Thanks very much.
I suppose, Rob, it's when you end up seeing that behaviour means that people start to lose trust in each other.
Yeah.
And right up front, you said about honesty and trust. And as soon as that starts to go, then you're on a sticky wicket, so to speak, because then people stop having honest conversations, and then the performance drops.
Yeah, yeah, and often, on the way through, you can, as I say, you can influence behaviour, and this is the bit, about. If you can't change the people, and how much can you change the person? How much does the person want to change? They may not be able to. They may not want to. And the team will put up with them, you know, for a certain point, and they will challenge them and they'll work with them, and their performance in a team environment often, you know, if their performance is helping the team win matches and their behaviors are just a bit sort of outside where the team would like them to be, but that individual is helping win matches, then everybody goes, well, okay, we'll put up with this. The moment that starts to drift and their performance is no longer helping the team win matches or is helping less and less, then people start to go, right, well, either the team decide that they don't want them, or the management have to realize that this is now going to start damaging. This will start damaging the whole, and it does, and it happens all the time.
I guess it is an approach that you do spell it out to that individual that, you know, if the change that's required doesn't happen, then an eventuality is this will be, you know, a change will be made.
And I think there comes a point where you have to do that. And if you don't do that, either you don't recognize it, then you know you're probably not reading the tea leaves. But you also have to tackle it head on. Otherwise, the rest of the team will be talking behind your back as a manager, going, "Why are they not dealing with this?" Because down the pub, everybody's going, "It's time he went," or "It's time she," you know, or this is now reaching that tipping point, which is what I'm talking about. And then that's where you know having as much intelligence as possible around the dressing room. And that's where having somebody, I mentioned a guy called Steve Black at Newcastle, you know, you need intelligence being fed back from the team, because you can't be everywhere all the time. But it soon starts to eat away at confidence and belief and the teamwork. If too many people are getting away with things that the rest of the team don't find acceptable.
Yeah. Does that sound familiar to everybody? I see quite a lot of nodding going on around, where we've all been in situations like that, where you're just thinking, right, if things don't change, I'm going. And that's the other thing, you get the talent drain. Is that something that's familiar to people? Anybody want to jump in?
There's a couple of hands up, Martin, I think.
Lou. Oh, Lou.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I've been taking some notes, Rob. Thank you so much. This is almost like you've been sitting in my team and listening to some of the conversations over the past couple of weeks, a month. So I completely agree. I work for an ethical bank, so the values and the culture are really important. And what you were saying about, you know, we've got 5 values, and we've got it's integrity, it's teamwork, and we have them plastered all around. And I have quite a lot of weekly challenges with senior people where I don't think people in the organisation are demonstrating those, and the behaviour is very different. And so I completely resonates with me, all of that. What I was going to ask is, what I tend to find in when things are going wrong in a business or in a team, that's when some of this behaviour comes out, and it really comes to the surface. And I was that's my experience. I was just wondering if you think the same, because I think when it's all going well, people can keep a lid on, you know, how they actually behave in reality. But it's hard for all organizations at the moment, you know, commercially. And I think that's where, you know, particularly for me as in an ethical business, you're trying to toe the line between running the bank successfully but doing the right thing for customers and for staff. So yeah, I just wondered if you've got thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I actually think it's, we probably all have conversations. I think it's as hard now to manage people as I've experienced, you know, in 30 odd years, because I think the environment is tough. there's no question about that. You know, it's been a really tough last 4 years, 5 years. People are, and this is a big generalization, isn't it? But I think, you know, people are finding things hard generally, and if there's pressure, you know, on cost of living, and if there's then pressure in the work environment, which there is, we're all experiencing that in terms of, you know, cost reduction or just trying to manage some difficult situations. It's really hard then, I think, to you know, to hold the team first line, and people's behaviors start to come out, and I think that this is when the true behavior starts to come out under pressure, and that's when I think, as a manager, I think it's more important now to deal with problems quickly than it ever has been, because I think if you don't deal with them quickly, the rot sets in. And with, you know, the whole bad apple situation, I think it is true, and it's really important. And making decisions to remove people again is really hard, isn't it? You know, it's probably one of the hardest things. You know, everybody's HR departments now are probably run off their feet, which so therefore it's not easy. Which goes back to probably the one message that I keep telling myself, and maybe the one message coming out of this is how do you get the right people in the first place? How you know, and that's really difficult as well when you're recruiting people, and you know, people know how to you know, put forward their CVs, and they know how to, you know, get interviewed well, and how do you get that bit right at the start? But if there was a magic pill that said, right, every piece of recruitment I do is going to be absolutely spot on, then that. But it's but yeah, look, I'm not necessarily answering it that clearly, but I think dealing with the problem, you have to deal with it head on in the current climate, because it's hard. Look, we all know it's hard to deal with these things head on, but I think it will get much harder if you don't deal with it head on.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
I've got Alistair next. Ollie, you've got your hand up as well, but I've also got Alex in the chat room. So we can do Alistair, then Alex, then Ollie. That's okay. Alistair.
Hi. Thank you, Martin. Rob, really interested to hear your views. I'm sort of still in awe, a bit starstruck by actually being on the same screen as you. As you were a bit of a hero when I was playing rugby.
When you were young.
When I was young, yeah. I liked to kick and fly hard, because that meant you didn't have to tackle people. So that seemed like a good idea to me. I just wondered whether you know, are you familiar with? You must be familiar with Clive Woodward's teamship rules.
Yeah.
And whether that plays a part in what you're thinking of as well, because when someone breaks the teamship rules, they're out, was the way he looked at it, and whether you agree with that. And then I've got a supplementary, slightly frivolous question, which I was trying to find the right way to phrase it. And it, you know, when we're talking about whether people are, you know, adding value to the team, and whether people think they are, and you used the example of Kevin Peterson. What's your views on how far we went as England Rugby with Eddie Jones when he wasn't really adding value to the team?
That's a loaded question at the end.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, two interesting ones. So yeah, look, I think Clive's teamship rules were ultimately those teams' values, if you like, those teams' culture, and the teamship rules were made by the team, and that's the other thing about this stuff. If we just hand down, you know, if we stand up and hand down a set of values or some teamship rules that we've decided that the team are going to operate by, that doesn't get the buy-in that it does if the team create their own rules and their own ways and this ways of working or behaviors. That's much more powerful, and it makes it much easier for the team and the leadership to call somebody out if they're breaking their own rules. It doesn't mean that somebody won't break them, because somebody always does. That's just the nature of people. But it's really powerful if the team own them, and that goes back to the sort of values piece. How do you create those values? The team have to own them, and then if they break them themselves, you've got more of a right to call people out on it, which is absolutely the right thing to do. New Zealand Rugby are very, very big on that, and always have been. When you get to the point of when has somebody lost it, like Eddie, let's be honest, he lost. Sorry, the other thing that I wrote down when you were talking about the teamship rules in sport, and I've seen it in the office now as well, we talk a lot about energy sappers, it's so obvious who they are, because you spend 90% of your time dealing with 10% of the people. And if you're doing that, then you've got an energy sapper who is sapping the energy out of you as a manager and leader, but they're sapping energy out of the team as well. And it's amazing how much energy that they do sap. The Eddie situation, I think, is a bit different in the sense that, sometimes somebody's just run their course, and Eddie, from the outside looking in, he'd probably lost the team, the supporters, probably a year before he was actually finally removed from the England job. And that again is the management, senior management, probably not recognizing, not taking action early enough, and leaving it. And that's part of the management challenge, isn't it? Because if you've got that high profile person who has been successful in the past, things have gone off a bit. It's a bit like, do you change the person or don't you change the person? Do you think that, I think the RFU were just hoping that Eddie would come good and he would take us through to this World Cup, and he's got a good World Cup record. But that's where the difficult decisions, you have to make judgment calls, haven't you, all the time about where's this now at? Is this recoverable with the individual and the team, or has it gone past that tipping point, which is what I mentioned earlier? I think on the outside, everybody involved in rugby would say that Eddie passed the tipping point probably a year before that he was actually removed. But that's easy to say from the outside. It's not so easy when you're sat in the decision-making seat that actually has to make the decision.
Or if you're sitting in a Twickenham seat, it costs you 120 quid watching a load of dross. But there you go. That's a slight personal thing. I wasted a lot of money watching that rubbish.
But that was the judgment. And actually, one of the reasons that I was at the game against South Africa in November when he did, and that was probably a year too late. But in a sense, the mood of Twickenham, as much as anything else, got Eddie the sack, because we were all thinking exactly what you've just said.
Thank you very much.
I think I'll just come to some of the others at the moment. I think the interesting thing with the tipping point is it'd be very nice if there was a formula for it.
Yeah.
And understanding what it is.
Yeah.
But actually, I suspect everybody on this Zoom knows when it happens.
Mm.
And it's actually, and I speak as somebody who didn't do it, it's actually having the courage to go, in my opinion, in my heart, I know this is a tipping point and I've got to take action, rather than, as RFU did, I will hope that Eddie gets it right.
Yeah, but there is no formula, is there? It's gut feel. and it is literally, you just sense it, and then you've got to have the courage to do something about it. Because if you don't, you're actually not being fair on the rest of the team. But not everybody can do it, and I'm not saying it's easy, because it's not, and I've not done it as well. Which is why I think having those that do it, I think we can all recognise it. We've got to do something about it.
Yeah. Okay. If I go on to Alex, then Ollie, then Karen. So Alex.
Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, Rob, thanks very much for that. I was just wondering about a couple of perspectives on diversity. Kind of one in your new role for the ECB, and having stood on many Oxfordshire cricket pitches, watching private schools dominating the talent pool. Yeah. Wondered what your perspective on diversity was, sort of grassroots cricket, but also maybe on your leadership team or prospective leadership team, and what your views are there, and maybe whether there's a link between the two. Because I guess elite sport, like you've been talking about it, as if the best players are in the room and you pick the best players, but actually what if they're not in the room?
Yeah, well, I think that's at the heart of everything at the moment, isn't it? And particularly in sport, how do you get to, how do you give everybody the opportunity, which hasn't happened, and we know that, we all know that, and I was incredibly lucky that the route that I went down, and it completely changed my life. There's no question of that. So sport, and cricket is not an easy sport to get youngsters in. It's a bit of a generalization, but football, we all grew up watching football. We all love football. Football is a global game. Football, you can go to the park and put your jumper down and kick a ball around. Cricket, and like lots of other sports, is expensive. It's difficult. There's not much of it in state schools. All of those issues that they're not going to be fixed overnight. It's finding a way of actually giving opportunity for those that in the past have not had that opportunity, whether that's in leadership teams or in just getting kids, boys and girls. And the other dynamic now in all sports, but cricket is just off the scale with the interest in girls playing cricket. Disability cricket doesn't get talked about a great deal, but there is a lot of physical disability cricket going on in this country. And cricket is a game that actually lends itself much more than perhaps some other sports to opportunities. So the transformation is remarkable, and how that's managed, and how that pace of change, which is the other thing we sort of touched on earlier, is managed for all sports. Women's football, I mean, just what we've seen in the last 5 years is just mind-blowing, and that's just touching the surface. The women's 100 in cricket, women's IPL in India, girls. Nat Siva Brunt, I was at university with her dad. She's getting one of the highest paid women's cricketers in the world, going to the women's IPL, getting paid 400,000 for 6 weeks' work. This is what I sort of said during my chat a bit. I think I'm not sure any of us can keep up with the pace of change of what's going on. I think it's happening. We're not in control of some of this stuff anymore. It's just we're reacting to stuff that's going on around us in a way that I don't think I've ever. I went to Newcastle in '95 when rugby went professional with Sir John Hall, and I felt like the game and the entrepreneurs who got into rugby, I felt they were sort of in control of what was going on, and they were shaping it. In cricket now, I'm sort of looking at it going, my goodness, it's happening at such a pace that from an administration point of view, it's really hard to make the right decisions, which is what we've been talking about this morning. We're all making decisions all the time, every minute of every day, around our people and our direction of travel. I think it's hard. It's as hard as it's ever been in terms of getting those decisions right.
Does that mean your leadership team needs to, I mean, obviously everyone would say it should reflect who you want to be playing the game.
Yeah.
Is that one of your priorities? Because I mean, I would say at grassroots level, it's still the people running the county game and kind of drawing the talent up are all, you know, they're probably a private school master who's picking the team that they pick on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
There's a lot of locked in structural things that unless the top is kind of saying, no, we kind of expect it to, we expect to see something different at the bottom, it will stay stuck a little bit. Whereas I suspect you're right, the women's game and some of the other games will be organic. But I think, ironically, it's the men's game that's is suffering most from a lack of diversity, I think. But anyway.
No, I agree. Look, I think it's a really good point, but it's such a big question, isn't it? How do you change those, you know, decades and decades of structures that have been built up in institutions, and it's not just sport, you know, there's loads, all of our institutions in this country really are trying to work out how to move quickly to change things. And that's, you know, ultimately it starts with governance, doesn't it, at the top, and what's the diversity of boards and how is that fed through so that you can actually affect change. But some things are so structural and so challenging. And you know, you touched on it there with private schools and cricket. You know, without private schools playing cricket in this country, nobody would be playing cricket at school. So how you've got to change that? How do you change that back into state school to provide cricket in state school? That provision is it's not there. It's not there in rugby either in state schools, really. Some, but that's a massive change that's required.
Yeah, maybe it's. I'm not a fan of the 100, but it looks the 100 in cricket. For those not familiar with it, it's each side bats for 100 balls. That's it, and it resembles street cricket to me.
Yeah,
it looks like street cricket. And why do people follow football? Because they play football in the street.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the price that you pay for something which is not a purist, but we see. Let me jump on because Ollie's been waiting quite a time with his hand up. So Ollie, what have you got to ask?
No worries at all, Martin. Rob, I'm a front row forward, so I'll have to get a reference in here somehow.
Well done. We can't play the game without them.
You spoke really articulately about both dimensions of changing the team, right? But you have dealt with Gareth Chilcott and you deal with, I don't know, like Richard Thompson at the ECB now. How have you changed yourself? Because I don't believe it's the same Rob Andrew that steers both of those fellas.
Oh God, that's a really good question. You flummoxed me there. I mean, it's.
But can I just confirm? With Gareth Chilcott, no relation. He's only got one L. Which means my name gets misspelt a lot. It's all his fault.
I don't necessarily know how to answer that question. I don't think. I think maybe I've. I mean, I think there's a lot in leadership around emotional intelligence, around understanding people, about listening, about trying to shape decision making that you have a view of where you want to get to, and there's the difference between leading you know, I have learned a lot over time, and I've watched people, and I've changed the, you know, I've been around quite a lot of teams now, and there's a big difference between always leading from the front and sometimes leading from the back, and trying to get that balance right so that you bring people with you. And I think that's the teamwork bit that I've touched on right at the beginning, is trying to find a way of you've got to lead, because you're in a position of leadership. So people want to see you leading, but they don't necessarily want to see you dominating. They want to feel like, you know, they've all got a part to play. So, you know, Gareth Chilcott, love him to bits. You know, Coochie, as he's known in our day, you know, again, you wouldn't want to meet him down a dark alley in Bath on a Saturday night, particularly if you were playing for Wasps, as I was down at the Rec quite a few times. But, you know, everybody, and this is the point, everybody has their part to play, and it's finding a way of, from a leadership point of view, of making them feel like they're just as important, you know. So Coochie or a prop forward in any team are just as important as the fly half who might kick the goals, or Rory Underwood who scores the tries. And if you can get that bit right, and that's the emotional intelligence bit, then you've got a chance. And I think that's what I've probably learned most about myself, as well. If I'm honest. But you're right, they're very different characters, very different people, come from very different backgrounds. And I think that's the other bit, you know, just recognizing the value in everybody. Back to the earlier question around, you know, this whole debate of diversity and inclusion. It's so important. And I think that's where rugby has taught me the most, actually. If anything, cricket teams a bit, but probably rugby teams are the most complex and the most diverse. And you know, getting that group of 15, now 23 people to work together. I mean, you couldn't get much more diverse and different than, you know, Gareth Chilcott and Rory Underwood, and yet they're probably they're best mates in the dressing room playing for England, because they both know that they both have really important jobs. And it's a really good question.
Maybe it's looking after each other. I'll ask both of the rugby players here, Ollie and Rob, which is, Rob, you'll know when the team is together, when you get nailed and roughed up a bit, and you know that Gareth Chilcott would go and sort out at some point the person who'd done that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why that trust bit, which I talked about at the beginning, and the teamwork, I said to you last week, Martin, when we got together, that I loved looking around our dressing room just as we were about to walk out in Cardiff or Paris or Johannesburg or wherever we were in the world. And I was looking around the dressing room at that minute just before you're about to walk out in front of 80,000 people in Paris or somewhere. And you are literally eyeballing everybody and going, I'm glad they're here. glad that they're walking out with me. Because you couldn't deliver if you didn't trust every single person in that dressing room that you were walking out with. And the work went in to creating that trust. And that's the teamwork bit that I think we're in real danger of losing at the moment because of COVID and because of working practices. Teamwork needs to be worked on. It just doesn't it's not, we can use the word teamwork, but what does it mean? It means spending time together and working together.
Can I bring Karen in just now? Karen, you in the chat, you put something along these lines about, without being people getting together, what are the tips for getting that remote teamwork, if you like?
Yeah, that's right. That's beautifully set up actually for my question there. So I work in football, and we, to support match days, we already have a lot of people who are having to take back time in lieu. Couple that now with the expectation of being able to work from home several days a week. Just really, have you got any tips on how to get the team together, you know, when you're faced with a lot of people not being in the office at the same time?
No. Well, only because I'm trying to. Only because I'm battling with it myself. We're literally, you know, I'm still at Sussex. I'm leaving at Christmas and joining the ECB in January, and I think it's the number one issue for leaders to work out at the moment, because we're, you know, we've now got this hybrid working, whatever that means. And look, I think there's huge value in it. You know, I'm sat in my kitchen this morning. I've got loads of work to do today. I was in Brighton. Yes, I live in London. I commute to Brighton every day. And it's made a massive difference to me not having to do that every single day. But what's beginning to happen, I think people are beginning to really start to value the time they are in the office, because it's not all the time. And I think what we've got to work out is, how do we harness that time together and make it really valuable? And I don't know the answer, because we're having the same debate, but I think there is an answer in there, because I think what's beginning to happen is people like the freedom of being able to work from home if it's appropriate, but actually they're beginning to think, I actually now go into the office today, and I was in Monday, Tuesday, and there are more and more people going back into the office, because they're realizing that more and more people are actually going to be in the office when they go in. So it's almost happening organically. So I think it will find its place, because people actually don't want to just sit at home all the time. But equally, they don't want to have to be in the office all the time as well. So I think it's starting to happen. I'm sensing it happening, and it's how do we accelerate that, probably with. So yeah. So no, I haven't answered the question at all.
No, it's actually it's quite good to know that somebody else is feeling the pain. I'm sure we all are. It's just difficult to not. You must have to have quite a hammer-like, or quite a clumsy approach to it, and kind of, you know, you will be in on these days, we will all be together on these days. And, you know,
yeah, I think people.
Like
I don't know. Yeah, we're having that same debate, and we haven't gone down that we must be in on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or but we've left it probably a bit too long before. But I'm not sure that forcing it is the answer either. I think it's starting to happen, and I think people are, you know, there's a couple of days we've now seen that, you know, Mondays and Tuesdays actually, where actually nearly everybody's in. So it's becoming like, okay, well that's means we can start to build on this stuff again. But it's really, really important. And obviously we've all had to deal with it and come through a crisis, but it's but I don't think. Yeah, sorry, I'll shut up.
No, I was going to say, maybe it's something you said earlier, which I think was absolutely on the money, which was, you don't hand culture and values down to people. You enable people to draw it together. And maybe it's the time which says, actually, we get people together and say, what's the best time to be at home doing work? What do you want to achieve when you're at work? So that we actually structure work in a different way. It's not just you're in a different place at a different desk. You're doing different types of work in different environments, and it'll be different for all sorts of companies, but they'll work it out.
Yeah, I think the other challenge just that we're finding is that we've got a pretty mixed business, sports businesses, as you know, and some people have to be in at work all the time. Yeah. So, you know, the operations team, the grounds team, you know, obviously. So we've got a bit of a challenge that's developed where some people have no choice but to be in because their job demands that they're in. Others have got the flexibility that, you know, they're happy with. And there's a real danger here that there's a bit of a teamwork thing starting to splinter, where some are saying, well, I can't be at home. I've got to be in the office. Why aren't that team in the office? What are they doing?
Yeah.
You know, they're at home. Are they working? And so there's a bit of team stuff there that I think is in date, could splinter if it's not managed properly.
Yeah. Okay. Sally, you've had your hand up for a bit. We've got 7 minutes if I go all the way to 10:30. You never know, we might run over, but just to make sure everybody's got schedule and things to do. Sally, you had a question you wanted to ask.
I will be quick, but Rob, you've quite neatly teed it up for my question actually on your last comment around kind of teams in the bigger sense, kind of splintering.
Yeah.
And I guess my question really was, you know, in individual departments in an organization and in any kind of, you know, arena really, it can often feel a bit easier to kind of engender that sense of team, and, you know, you've got collective objectives and you just come into contact with each other more frequently. So kind of that team spirit can naturally over time evolve. And the kind of leadership is consistent, but kind of collectively then bringing all teams in an organization together, you know, certainly in larger organizations that I've worked in where payroll runs to, you know, potentially thousands of people, is obviously harder. So the values align, but the approach taken by different leaders in different teams is often different. So kind of from your sense, how would you engender that sense of team spirit in a wider sphere?
Yeah, I think it's the question we're trying to answer, and because I think it's pre-COVID, pretty much no matter how big or small your organization was, pretty much everybody was in the office all the time. You know, there was probably a little bit of working from home, but not like it is now. So it was easier, I think, much easier for the individual teams who were in the office together, the bigger organization. There was more coming together of groups of people. There was more socializing, and that's another issue that I think people have to think carefully about. What does team building look like? What does socializing look like? Because that's changed as well. It's not just about going down the pub anymore. People don't want to do that, or some do and some don't. So you've got to think about what is team building and team bonding, you know, which goes back to my teamwork thing. What does that actually look like now? Because we're all facing a world that's been turned upside down in the last 3 years. It's probably the biggest change that any of us have ever seen in our working lives. So we're all trying to work out, and I am, you know, at Sussex, smallish group, small team, small organization, different teams doing different things. How do you bring back? And this is classic rugby stuff. In rugby teams, you've got teams within teams. You've got the front row who never talk to anybody else most of the time. You've got the back row. You've got the half backs. You've got the mid. You know, you've got backs who in all teams. In all organisations, you've got teams within teams. And how do you bring the teams within teams together to make the sum of the parts to be greater than, you know, the whole? And that's the bit that people have to work out now. And I don't actually know quite how that's going to play out. But if organizations don't do it, the teams will splinter, and the sum of the parts won't be greater than the whole. And that, I've sensed it a little bit. Even at Sussex, we've had a little bit of grumpiness around, well, you know, we're always in because we have to be, and where's everybody else on a Friday? You know, what are they doing? And it's starting to happen, and I think people need to work out what it is. People do have to accept and understand that if your role means that you don't need to be in the office 5 days a week, then there's no point the organisation forcing you in 5 days a week, because you're just then going to splinter that group and you're going to risk losing people. But equally, those that have to be in 5 days a week, I think we have to work out how they accept that their role demands that, but the organisation doesn't need to do that for everybody. But how do you pull them together?
Yeah.
What is the vehicle that brings the whole organisation together?
Yeah, and it's really difficult, isn't it? Because when you've got people working these different working patterns across teams, it's almost like mini cultures can start to be created.
Yeah.
And it's managing that so that doesn't breed resentment or problems.
Correct. Yeah. It's happening. It's happening. I can feel it happening. We've sensed it this year at Sussex, and we're trying to bring people with us without dictating, because you get a team that has to be in the whole time. They would probably say, well, why can't everybody else come in all the time? Well, if you start enforcing that on people who just don't need to be in now and are working, and this is the other management judgment, isn't it, is are they working at home? Are they actually doing what you want them to do? But that's a management thing, to make sure that they are doing, and that's another cultural piece. And have you got people that are not working? I mean, the good people will probably be working harder from home than they are in the office, because they're not commuting and they're on they're working on the computer the whole time. But there are those who come into the office every day who do question whether the Friday working from home is people are actually walking the dog, or but then that's judgment, isn't it? As long as the work gets done, I don't really care when it gets done, as long as it gets done.
Yeah. And that comes back to the trust element, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Rob, you used that. I know we're running up to 10:30, but you, when we were talking the other day, you used the phrase, the art of the possible. And maybe that's got something to do with the different teams. The art of the possible is, well, this is what we could achieve if we all play together and if we all play our role. And if we don't, then it doesn't work.
Well, look, you're right. It's the challenge of managing teams, managing people, making decisions, making judgment calls. And that's the bit, the gut feel bit. We're all making judgment calls all the time. And I was, making judgment calls on a rugby pitch all the time about this next decision. How is it going to impact the front row? How's it going to impact the wingers? What is the judgment call right now of my decision? And that's the bit that we're all trying to do, and that's gathering information, using emotional intelligence, getting feedback, because you're just trying to. There is no right or wrong answer to this. I don't think. I think less so than ever is there really a black and white answer to some of this stuff.
Sometimes perhaps it. I mean, you mentioned earlier, just to wrap up, if that's okay, folks, you mentioned earlier about Johnny Wilkinson scoring that drop goal to win the World Cup in 2003. But I think people forget you actually scored 2 drop goals at full time to win very important World Cup matches back in the 80s and early 90s. And so what goes through your mind when you're thinking, I'm going to do it? I know you're planning to get there, but in the end, you have got to stick it over the posts.
Yeah, I think that's just in a way that's a decision at a point in time that you've practiced, you've prepared for. You know that could happen. As you say, mine sadly were not in a World Cup final to win a World Cup, but never mind. They were close, semi-final and quarter-final. Yeah. But those, that's just, in a way, that's just an individual action that you're prepared to do. You have prepared to do that. The team has put you in a position to do that. The Johnny Wilkinson drop goal, that's the whole team put him in that position from a line-out. He's on the halfway line. you know, every piece of the jigsaw needed to fit together to get to that end point, which was where successful teams, you know, it's the coming together, and it's the sum of the parts, I think, which is, if you can get that working, then you will get more out of the team. But I think it is, as I said, I think it's as hard now as it's possibly ever been.
Lovely, thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks, everybody, and especially thanks to our special guest, Alex. I know you've got your hand up. We're running over 10:30. We can hang around, but and also Karen, you've got your hand up as well. But if we'll finish formally now, and if people want to stay on for a few minutes, that'd be great. But I would like to thank our very special guest, Rob Andrew, for a fascinating session this morning. So thank you, Rob.
Pleasure. No, lovely to
Rob.
talk to you all. Yeah. Good. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.